tremendous example for us to learn from. COVID offers us a lot of lessons, and so in this time of lockdown, I would say really keep focused on the hope and keep moving forward. I'm absolutely humbled and privileged to talk to you about this subject today, and thank you once again for having me. I was wondering if you were to agree if I could share my screen here. If that's okay, then I shall. I've got a few slides, and I'll walk you guys through a few things related to the current situation we're all living through together here right now. So may I share my screen, please?
Yes, please.
Thank you. A whole range of things. And mind you, SARS and so on also came from the coronavirus. We now have a novel coronavirus, but the SARS, for example, which we've experienced over the years earlier, came out of coronavirus. And in each of these cases, MERS was much worse than SARS in many ways, but only because it was sort of focused on some geographies we didn't hear much. But what is very important to understand is that in each of these cases, we have had movement of viruses from animals to humans. So these are zoonotic, what are called zoonotic viruses. And what has happened is that over a period of time, through human activity, we have devastated habitats that were otherwise, animal habitats. But we've done it in an effort to so-called promote development. And what we've done is we've devastated forests, we've devastated freshwater bodies, we've devastated a lot of natural resources, and in fact 3/4 of what is otherwise been land resources and water resources. And we have found ourselves increasingly at risk of infectious diseases because of our proximity to animals, merely because we've destroyed the habitat. And the reason that we've destroyed these is because we have thought we are moving toward development. We'll talk more about that. And the one thing we do know about coronavirus, although it's been contentious in some ways, is that it has in fact transmitted from animals to humans. That is not contentious. Whether it happened through a lab or whether it happened through a live market or what they call wet markets may be challenged. Although there's a lot of science to very clearly indicate where it came from, it has transmitted from animals to humans. So that is a very critical point for us to keep in mind because it underlies what we're going to talk about here today. Now, one of the other things is that COVID serves as, like I said, a wake-up call. There is an opportunity for us to learn. And the most important thing is that we must consider what are these models of development that we have set out to master over the last, let's call it particularly the last 4 decades, where we have devastated our planet, we have devastated animal habitat, we've moved in close proximity to animals, we've exposed ourselves to zoonotic viruses, and now we're living the way that we are. And if this is called development, then we've got something to worry about. But at the end of the day, we do have an opportunity, and I want you to focus on the window of opportunity. While we have had models that have not led us up to a point of very productive living, especially as we think of our lives in COVID times, the important thing is that we have an opportunity to redefine our values for development, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that. So, can anybody tell me, what to you is development? What do you see development as? Can any one person sort of tell me what is development, as we're all studying business and we're studying a lot of things that will mean moving forward in our lives and making progress? What is development to you? Anyone? Okay. Well, what I want to say is I can't see everybody, so I'm just going to move on. Sorry if I'm missing someone, but I can only see a few people here. So I just wanted to say one of the important things to keep in mind is that development has been about certainly per capita income. And we've also looked at things like what does it equate to in terms of progress. So we look at how many gallons of Coke are people drinking, how many tons of meat are being consumed per capita. However, I think that model is something that we have been challenged by, especially by COVID. And I want to draw your attention to an important model of development which actually has been put in place in Bhutan over the last. Bhutan is a very small country, and it's in Asia, and actually their leadership has been absolutely exemplary, very unique. And what they came up with is something called gross national happiness. And this model of gross national happiness has been about measuring what matters. And in this case, they've looked at a range of parameters, the ones that you can see here. There are 9 parameters in particular that they look at which actually measure happiness. You know, a range of things from psychological well-being to health and mental well-being to ecological diversity, living standards, whether people are getting enough time for sleep and work, whether people have a role to play in governance. Do the citizens, for example, of Mexico have a role to play in the governance of their country? And also, what does it mean if we are developing while we are devastating our ecology? So they actually look at things like, are we maintaining diversity, ecological balance, and so on and so forth. And so I think it's something for us to think about in terms of redefining our values from the point of view especially of the planet and the planet's health, especially as we think about development. And you might have heard a lot of people telling you, wow, ever since this lockdown has happened, you know, we're seeing a huge big difference in terms of pollution, and a lot of the air quality is cleared up and so on, and vehicular pollution has been eliminated. Yes, it is true. All of that has happened, and I'm going to tell you more. But the important thing to say, for example, when we started out with the pandemic, in January, when most of the world didn't even know what COVID really was, WHO had barely even announced that there was a novel coronavirus in China. China had already it is the largest emitter of carbon, it's the largest carbon emitter in the world. Similarly, New York City, which is one of the biggest, most heavily sort of populated and busy, bustling metropolitan cities in the world, within a few days of lockdown, found a 50% reduction in nitrous gases, which are mostly sort of emitted by vehicles and so on, because trucks were not moving goods back and forth from the city. So they found actually that they had the cleanest day ever recorded since the day records were being maintained in New York. And in India, which it has New Delhi as its capital, which is one of the most polluted cities in the world, had within the first week a 30% reduction in its pollution levels. And since then it's now down to 60. So everybody's very hopeful that, you know, maybe because of the lockdown the planet has hope. But I want to say to you very clearly that even though there has been a reduction in pollution, and they're saying that the lockdown may actually bring the most dramatic reduction in carbon emissions ever in such record time, it is nowhere close to what we need in order to slow down anything close to what we are facing in terms of climate change. And I'm going to draw your attention to a few things. We are currently in terms of our emissions much higher today than we were on this day last year, even with the lockdown. Okay, that's one. The second thing to remember is that even though we have seen a significant drop in our carbon emissions, we are going to have to keep a 6 to 7% reduction in carbon emissions for 10 years in a row, like a whole decade, every single year, before we're able to get to the 1.5 degrees Celsius mark, which is above pre-industrial period. So in other words, the increase in temperature being 1.5 degrees Celsius above what it was in the 19th century. And we are hoping it won't go beyond that, because the devastation that the planet will face will be way beyond what COVID has brought our way. And we need to do this for 10 years in a row in order to be able to achieve the 1.5 degrees. So we need a lot more work to be able to achieve what we're hoping to in terms of in terms of reduction in carbon emissions. And so this is the reality of things in terms of the lockdown. Of course, we don't know how long the lockdown will go and so on and so forth, but we still need to keep this up for a decade. Now, I also want to say a very important thing to you guys, and especially you guys, because you guys are the innovators, you're the ones who are going to be the leaders of what I call today, not even the leaders of tomorrow. But the pandemic itself is bringing around a lot of hazardous pollution, from plastic to biomedical to a whole range of pollution which we haven't begun to even think about in terms of its implications. I know everybody needs protective material and everybody is buying it large scale, which is what is needed, but we haven't begun to think about the ramifications of this. And I'm going to give you a real example, and so this is going to be something that will be interesting, especially for you guys, and I'm going to encourage you to always think ahead. So when people came up with the whole idea of solar technology, okay, this was some years ago, everybody said solar technology is going to change the world. And yes, solar technology offers us tremendous potential to change the world. However, today, we are struggling with the whole idea of how to dispose those solar panels. The solar panels are hugely toxic. They have a lot of lead. They have a whole lot of other inherent toxicity within the solar panels. We never thought about, when we came up with the technology, of how it should be disposed. And so there are places, mostly highly impoverished communities like those in Bangladesh and so on, that actually have tremendous amounts of pollution in the soil, toxicity in the soil and in the waterways, because they have been dumping solar panels over there. So I'm going to say that whatever you do with your lives and the work that you do, I know which offers the potential to change the world, think about the full product life cycle. Try not to think about the immediate benefits without thinking of how the product will ultimately be disposed and how that will be safely managed. So similarly for the pandemic and the pollution generated through the pandemic. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. Is this appropriate? Is it social distancing or physical distancing? What do you think? I mean, we're all always talking about this. Is it actually social or is it physical?
Physical.
Yeah. Absolutely, it's physical. We call it social, but it's actually physical. And this is the thing, that actually with the data that we have, and I'm going to go into that real quick, people are connecting more. Of course, that is those people who have connections. So what we found through the data today is that if you look at the same day last year, and I'm talking about April, this is data from April, these are called stat shots from this month, 2020, that the internet users that we have today are 7% over what they were today last year. And they have shot up particularly during the time of lockdown. Similarly, with social media use, if you look at the numbers today and you look at the numbers last year, we're at 3.81 billion users, which is 8% more than they were at the same time last year, with a spike, a massive spike during the time of lockdown. So these numbers have really shot up only in the last some weeks. And what they found also is that the latest data showed that the number of internet and social media users around the world have increased by more than 300 million in the past 12 months. So actually people are physically distancing, I hope, but they are not socially distancing as long as they have access to technology and other means to connect. And this data clearly reveals that. What we found is that there have been big jumps in digital activity, especially in countries where there have been the strictest lockdown, number one. Secondly, social media use and particularly video calling like this has gone up big time. And e-commerce, especially for grocery shopping wherever it's accessible, has also gone up. And then finally, of course, people are playing more video games and esports and things like that. And there are some digital advertisers who have found opportunity here as well, not everybody. So these are some of the key data that we found, but I also want to highlight that there's another very important thing, is that about 4.57 billion people are active internet users in a few countries around the world. Not everybody has access to internet. And so we must acknowledge that yes, while we have some people who are definitely accessing the internet, not everybody is able to do so. And we know that there's heavier internet usage in some countries vis-a-vis others. And so if you look at the numbers, actually, 59% of the global population is online, so there's nearly half the world that is offline. And that's something to think about. And also I want to highlight here that the size of the lockdown is now known as the biggest psychological experiment, global, that has ever been conducted. I mean, this is absolutely unprecedented, this period of lockdown. And right now, 1/3 of the world, which is 2.6 billion people, are in enforced lockdown. Some people are not in a strict, for example, if you take Sweden, for example, they are now reconsidering their model, but they never enforced lockdown. They told cafes and restaurants and everybody, keep your tables at 1 meter distance, do this and that, but they didn't put people in lockdown. They left it on the citizens. However, many people in the world, as you can tell, are in enforced lockdown, and these are just numbers by country, and you can see China and India, with the largest populations in the world, have the largest number of people in lockdown. What I want to also say is that this has a tremendous toll, quite naturally, on the world. And there have been multiple studies which have been published in The Lancet. The Lancet is a peer-reviewed journal, which is one of the most important medical journals. And they found there's been cases of psychological stress, there have been insomnia, anxiety, irritability, depression, you name it. And this is a real outcome of this period of lockdown. There's the uncertainty of the lockdown, there's the whole distancing issue, and these are real. This has been sourced by the World Economic Forum, this data, but these are real issues. Also, in addition to that, along with mental health issues, which are big, as we discussed, also suicides have doubled. A lot of people have and gun sales have gone up, for example, by unprecedented numbers. March has seen 2.5 million firearms, I'm talking about the US, but there also is simultaneously the whole economic implication of this. So people are losing jobs, and in fact, as of the last some hours, ILO, which is the International Labour Organization, has said that close to 50% of the workforce around the world will be out of work. So these are real issues that people are facing. And of course, there's a whole other issue of people who are suffering all kinds of other diseases that were already there before COVID, but they're scared to access health facilities. So this is these are parallel, what they call pandemics, happening alongside. I also want to say that while people are spending time on computers and video calls and all of that, 70% of our communication is body language. So you can imagine the stress in communicating when people are actually only capturing a small part of what you have to give. And it's difficult for the people on the receiving end, but it's also difficult for people on the other side. And similarly with other pandemics that are underway, is domestic violence numbers are up, economically huge losses, social unrest, which is a very big one, hunger. Hunger is unprecedented. It is probably the largest numbers that they've ever seen. So the World Food Organization program says that 265 million people could be pushed into acute food scarcity and insecurity because of COVID. It's already happening. I want to say that estimates very clearly indicate that the pandemic could push huge numbers, according to this 49 million people, into extreme poverty. And it's people in Latin America. I mean, if you look at people closer, the Guatemala, even the Mexican-Guatemala borders, people who are already poor, who are going to be further hurt as a consequence of this pandemic. And similarly, Africa and Asia too. So these are implications that we have to keep in mind. And what I want to say is that between one group and another group, and sure, the virus by itself doesn't do, but those who are more vulnerable are the ones who are going to suffer. And here's just an image of people who are able to work from home. So you can see the blues are where people are able to work from home, but it's those with the highest incomes that are able to work from home, and many others who are not able to. So it is a real, it's hard for people from, especially those who live in clusters in poorer communities, to even isolate. So they are already more vulnerable to infection. And while there's hunger, I also want to say an irony of it is that food is being wasted because supply chains are not able to move food. And so this is mountains of food are being thrown away while people are starving. And I want to say that there's also simultaneously, for those who are online, what is called an infodemic. So that's an additional parallel pandemic. And there's a lady by the name of Sylvia Bryant, who's the director of infectious diseases and infectious hazards management at WHO, who's been focusing on this issue of the infodemic. And she said, we know that every outbreak will be accompanied by a kind of tsunami of information, but also within this information you always have misinformation or rumors, etc. We know that even in the Middle Ages there was this phenomena. But what I want to say is that right now, for those who have access to technology, we are in what's called the information age. So there's very quick transmission of information, and there's not only misinformation, but also cybercrime. And this is something to keep in mind. And I just pulled out a few things for you to look at here. But you'll see on the side right at the bottom here, even WHO has put out a note here saying, beware of criminals pretending to be WHO. So they're putting out information about a range of things related to COVID. There's a whole lot of misinformation, and people are not able to decipher, especially since there's so much of an unknown around coronavirus. They're not able to decipher, whether there's veracity to this, is this accurate or is it not accurate? And similarly, there's phishing attacks. There's been all kinds of cybercrime. You'll see from the one down here that people have actually gone and spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on what they hoped would be protective material from these really slick online stores, to only find that they spent the money and nothing ever came. And they actually did a sting operation, and they found many of them were, these fancy stores set up in Nigeria and where whatnot. But there are these issues, and so I'm going to ask you to think about a few things when looking at trustworthy content online. And this is also research oriented. I want you to know that there's been plenty of research around this. First is, and I'm going to talk more in detail about them, but first is reliability of the source of information. The second is the credibility in the brand and the reputation. The third is the recency of information, like when was this really published? And fourth, of course, is the technological aspect. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about this. When you're looking at information, look at the source of information. Is it something that you know of? Is it like, say for example, I don't know, really WHO? Do you see WHO's URL on top? Or is it CNN Mexico? Is CNN would come with a reputation, or BBC or another source? I'm just giving you some examples. Similarly, when you receive an email, if you can look at whether the email comes from something that looks legitimate. The second thing is that with these phishing attacks, and there's been a lot of phishing attacks and a lot of fraud of all kinds, check out whether you know who sent you stuff. Do these look like attachments coming from sources you've never seen or don't know? So watch out for that. Of course, the obvious, but sometimes it's helpful to think about it, because I know people who are pretty well aware but still have experienced stuff like this. Don't give away your personal information, your credit card information to people who call on you. Always look for the credibility of the source of information. Where is it coming from? And if you're unsure, Google search, check, verify, are there reports about it? Do you see that this name has been flagged by other people? Look out for reports, look out for reviews, do that kind of thing. And certainly don't submit credit card information and financial information, other personal information, unless you know the source, know where you're going, and it's a secure end-to-end encrypted site. So you want to be careful of that. And also, to the extent that is possible, add extra security to your own accounts, whatever they may be, whether it's your email or another account. Make sure whatever levels of security you can add them. Also, for students who are doing research, please look and verify news and information you use. There are some sources like Full Facts. There's another one called Snopes. These audit content, and so when you look at content coming out from them, you can be sure that it's audited, that is verified, and that you can rely on it. The other is, I want to share, there's a very well-known saying, but it says, remember the old quip that the plural of anecdote is not data. So just because people are putting out stories is not equal to data. For those who are doing research among the Impulsa group, please be very careful. Data is typically what you would pick up from, and that is verified and reliable, would be from peer-reviewed journals and other sources that you can rely on. And finally, there's also a news website for those who are picking up news. The Conversation has, it's called The Conversation, has a handy guide to spotting fake news. So because we are in this world of unknowns, it's not unusual. None of us were born with this information about the novel coronavirus, but you want to look at reliable sources before you jump into picking up content. And I'm going to say also that there is going to be a life beyond COVID, but yeah, that normal may be a whole new normal from what we've heard and whatever we know. Indication also clearly suggests that this is going to take some time. There'll be multiple waves of infection, and also we know that we are exposed because of what we've done to zoonotic viruses. So we may have to live for a while in, or maybe who knows for how long, but we know post 9/11 terrorism became a way of life for us, so we may have to live with keeping a lot of these checks in place. However, I also want to say that, this is an image of social distancing, and this is an airport scanner and sanitizer. People are doing things already. I mean, I know people in China right now have started to get on subways or metros, and they have their temperature checked, they have to have a mask, and they have scanners to see where they're traveling. So the moment they get on the metro, before that they are scanned in, their data is being collected, and people know where they went and when they got off. And there's a lot of contact tracing, and this is something that's real. Contact tracing raises issues of privacy, and these are things we're going to have to go through a process of finding an equilibrium with. Where do people feel safe, and at the same time their privacy and their liberties are not treaded on. So these are real things, and there's a lot of discussion about this stuff happening right now. But what I'm going to say is that in a world of a lot of unknowns, the one thing we do know, is that the health of the planet and those that inhabit it, whether it's humans or there are other species, they are inextricably linked. And that we cannot possibly expect to have a balance in our life unless we maintain an ecosystem balance, which means letting other species survive, not devastating their habitats. We are going to have to think of new ways of living our lives where we develop while not devastating everything that we depend on. And I do want to say that we have a window of opportunity. Please remember that. We have a window of opportunity, so within that window we must act. And I really put it to people like you. I've had the exposure to Impulsa. Impulsa is a bright, young, hugely capable group of people led by wonderful people like Adriana, Rafa, all of you guys. And I really think that if you guys were to think forward, you'll really be the ones to lead the way. And I'm going to say only this, that we will need attention to communities that are vulnerable. We need attention to communities that are vulnerable. We need new paradigms for development. We need to be mindful and thoughtful. We need leadership, which you bring the promise to this planet really to transform initiatives so that we take people with us and we don't leave the most vulnerable people behind because we can't make progress as a world together as one global family unless we move with everybody together. And I'm going to also share with you that Albert Einstein said we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. So we're going to need new ways of thinking. I know that you guys have tremendous potential, and again, there's a window of opportunity, so I say, let's make it happen. And with that, I'd like to close by thanking you.
Intelligence. I think it's a great big topic nowadays, especially because of the lockdown and all the situation.
Yes.
But what I tell people in the webinars is that there are things that are in our control,
Yeah.
and there are things that are out of our control.
Yeah.
I think climate change, the pandemic, the coronavirus are things that are out of our control. But how do you cope with them? How do you deal with them in order for them not to affect you negatively and to make you be more positive, be more proactive?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. The issue of climate change is as follows. There are some things in terms of climate change that are far gone. However, there's two ways of looking at it. One is that we adapt to climate change, the other is we mitigate climate change. And we will need to adapt to some things for sure. However, there is room for us to mitigate. And actually through our work with the POP movement, where POP stands for Protect Our Planet, we work with young people, just like the ones we have in the room here, where they take action to protect our planet. We call ourselves mentors and we mentor them. But you know, we do have a window of opportunity. We need to adapt, but there are things we can mitigate. And if we all start to be careful and mindful of what we're using, how we dispose it, what our energy consumption is, how we utilize water, how we even generate vehicular pollution, all that kind of stuff. If we start being cautious and mindful about all of these things, we can make a difference. So just in the same way that you said that with emotional intelligence, there are some things that we can adopt in our own lives and our own behavior, which will make a difference. And there are some things which will come our way and we can't do anything about it. Climate change is similar, and that's how we treat it, really. And so we really encourage young people and others to start making a difference, because we can affect it. We have a window of about a decade during which, if we were all to take action, we can make a difference.